Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to the Experio Symposium. I'm really delighted to be able to share some of my fieldwork experiences, but also broader research encounters within this area of antimicrobial resistance. I've been working in this area now for approximately 6 years, and I've really also within the service design field worked within a very sort of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary space, with my role really sort of starting back, well, firstly actually with my PhD working within transportation and engineering and the seamless journey, but actually more recently I was brought in to facilitate a collaboration. This was in 2008 between Cranfield University in the UK, which is a postgraduate university all around the STEM subjects, and University of the Arts. And at the time, lots of people said to me, why is Cranfield University collaborating with London College of Communication in particular, with an art and design college? And I actually said at the time, although we will be converging the science and the technology with a more human approach, but also one which is design-led and also in most instances service-led. So that's really from a very broad perspective of how I started. So when I was thinking about this talk, design for and with local knowledge, one of the things that we struggle with actually, especially within an area with antimicrobial resistance, is that we have a very Eurocentric Western perspective of antimicrobial resistance. And I will explain what AMR actually is. So from this talk, there really are going to be 5 areas that I touch on: background to AMR, and also I'll be specifically relating to urinary tract infections, what a design approach looks like, and also this notion of bridging cultural divides. And I'm not just talking about the fact that this work is in India, but also the ones that we can often we sort of take for granted. So we have, I'm going to talk a little bit about the methodology, and this is the designing for and with local knowledge and where that's taken us, and also the service development side. And this is a very smaller research project that we got funded towards the end of the DOSA project. And this was part of a global impact accelerator. And I'll explain why we were given that money and what we did with it. And then the conclusions. So some of the takeaways from this is actually, how do we overcome this ontological divide? And the ontological divide within AMR is that this is considered to be a very scientific area. Up till recently, it was really considered to be very much within the domain of microbiologists, veterinary scientists, also human health experts. One of the things that we've had to do is take this very immersive view of place, including non-human entanglements. I'll be talking less about that today, but my work actually has also focused very much on the human and animal interface of AMR. One of the other things is this thing about challenging assumptions. And I use this term of geographical equivalence, and I will be just talking a little bit about that as I go through the presentation, what I mean by geographical equivalence. And the thing is, whenever we go into a research space, of course, we have our own ideas, whether it's about healthcare, what it is about using technical terms. And in that sense, you always have to be very mindful and check yourself continuously about actually, are you being sensitive to the particular context that you're in? Is the language appropriate? Are there misunderstandings? And actually, what would this look like if we were to reverse it? And I'll explain what I mean by that. And this really links into accounting for ourselves, how we go into the space with the community, and actually also how we build the relationships with them. And also, again, how we continue those and thinking how we leave them as well. So background and context to AMR. So the project has this acronym, a DOSA, and I don't know if any of you are familiar with Indian food. There is this very lovely dish called a dosa. So our acronym was Diagnostics for One Health User-Driven Solution to AMR. I'll be honest, I wasn't even that keen on having this user-driven, but bearing in mind, I was working with, in the first instance, people who are very, very unfamiliar with service design, and even having the idea of a user within the title was actually quite remarkable. So for DOSA, we really, the funding of DOSA came out of some background research that had been really building over really from 2012 to 2016, but of course had been going on much longer, about this problem of AMR. And it's when, in this instance, bacteria, but it includes viruses, fungi, and parasites, change over time so that they no longer respond to the medicines that target them. And one of the problems we have with this is, in a way, the slow pandemic. It's been happening now since penicillin was in fact discovered. And we've reached a point, because of our complex systems of food production and health, antibiotics are regularly now not working on particular pathogens. This means that it's going to be harder to treat diseases, it will increase in disease spread, and also it will contribute to severe illness and death. And this, rather tragically, it has some very similar parallels to climate change, will disproportionately affect the global south as well. And in one sense, you sort of feel this is something that won't touch me. There's lots of misconceptions about AMR. It's very easy you hear people slip into phrases such as, oh, we are becoming resistant to bacteria, but in fact, it's the pathogens and it's their genes that are becoming resistant. And this is important because what it means is that these genes travel across the globe they are remarkably effective at traveling across the globe. And the question is, again, why India? So India, in one sense, is, to quote a newspaper article rather depressingly, is the capital of AMR. And it has a whole range of multi-drug resistant organisms. And one of the reasons for this is that, again, you have very weak health infrastructure, you have close proximity between humans and animals, you have pressures on food systems, you have very low ratios of doctors and nurses to patients. And of course, there's also this issue of over-the-counter sale of antibiotics, and that can be for human health, but also for veterinary purposes as well. And in 2013, just to give some idea of the sort of emerging problem, every year, and bearing in mind, some people will say within the context of the population of India, this is small, but in 2013, and the figure has increased, 60,000 neonatal births of babies. They were born with antimicrobial resistance and, of course, did not survive. And that number is increasing. So they're actually being born with antimicrobial resistance, in which there are no antibiotics available to treat them for the most basic infections. This project has 13 global partners within the project. I won't be talking about all of them. And the project actually wasn't just in human health, but it was also looking at antibiotic residues in the dairy supply chain, and also looking at antibiotic residues within the shrimp production supply chain, the value chain. Within the dairy setting, it wasn't just residues. We were also looking at the development of a diagnostic for detection of subclinical mastitis. And I won't be talking about those today. So even within this project, there were actually 3 projects. Where I am going to focus the attention is in Silchar in Assam, and this is on the northeast side of India, on the borders of Bangladesh. And this is the human setting that I'll be really giving more an in-depth picture today. So when we think of urinary tract infections, this is a really uncomfortable and unpleasant infection to have, particularly it affects women. You can see the figures that I provided on the slide. And it's very, very common amongst women. It is in the West, but also particularly, again, in countries like India. If untreated, urinary tract infection can spread to the kidneys and it causes severe kidney damage. But it's not just the fact that that's really the end point of such an unpleasant infection. It's all the discomfort and also the other side effects that it causes. So at the start of this project, this focus on UTI was really decided by the scientific papers. There was a decision to focus on UTI, not because of context and not because of the fact that it's a health condition affecting women. It was that the data showed that there were high levels of infections, and this is one area that might be interesting to focus a diagnostic. So the start of this project, there were a lot of decisions that had already been made. And I'm not sure if any of you are familiar in the audience, but actually we've got this One Health user-driven solution to AMR. And this is a WHO term that really shows this entanglement between human, water, systems, agricultural practices, food production, but also wildlife, whether it's with wild birds or rodents, and how we as humans are really part of this very complex ecosystem, some of it, again, human-made in terms of hospitals, healthcare infrastructures, but also this wider and broader entanglement with other infrastructures. And one of the challenges, and the social scientists have picked up with this, is when we talk about a One Health approach, it becomes quite abstract. It's almost, where do you even start unpicking this problem? But it does help you also, on another level, just conceptualize this as a very global problem that isn't just about the humans and the human use of antibiotics. It's actually also about environments which can become depleted, but also about non-human species, animals, food systems, and also wildlife. And one of the things that really has helped inform our thinking with this project, especially early on, is that depending on the disciplinary lens that you look at this problem through, you will get very different viewpoints. So when you look at the scientific and the microbiological data on this, it's very much focusing on pathogens, the antibiotics that of course are not working. There tends to be a language of blame on individuals. There tends to be a tendency of words being used such as irrational use of antibiotics, poor practices. And when you look at the science, the social science literature, they take this much more infrastructural point. And I've actually found this very helpful at the start of the work, that there's some very good social scientists, real experts in this area, looking at these what infrastructural areas of AMR. And so if you take structures, we're looking at really the way that antibiotics have come to play this incredibly important role in modern societies, and they're quick fixes. They're ways in which we respond to time pressures. They're ways that we respond to our notions of our own health and our children and families' health. So these are conditions that have come very much within modernity. And actually, if one looks at, again, farming practices, and we look at the pressures to produce larger animals in shorter periods of times, these are really, again, infrastructural issues where antibiotics have come to play a really key role in these notions of speed and size. At the same time, we've got to look at these practices around the focuses on the end user. And I've mentioned, again, some of the literature talks about irrationality of using antibiotics. And there has been a very clear shift from this deficit model of people have no knowledge to embracing a more ecological approach. I will add that I very regularly come across, especially again from more the veterinary science side, where there is this talk of people not having knowledge. And even in our project, we do talk about knowledge, but this is not about blame. People are not aware. People have, in some instances, are very aware about overuse of antibiotics, but actually their circumstances give them no other options. So there are tensions there, again, around these discussions on practices. And then at the same time, we have this network of logistics, and this is about classifications and how we as, again, humans and animals are entangled in these classifications. and these are very much done at a top level. They can also be very spatial and temporal dimensions. And as I said, in my aquaculture research, this really plays out in terms of how local practices can actually be travel all the way across global food systems to, let's say, Rotterdam, where a consignment of shrimp will be rejected because it doesn't meet EU regulations on antibiotic residues. So again, these are very complex nested systems, and the social science literature doesn't offer solutions, but it gives a very good multi-layered understanding of the problem space. And our approach really, on all the three settings, but I'm now really going to only talk about the human setting, was really much of going into these spaces with a very, very open mind. And when I was talking about this idea of geographical equivalence, I've always taken the view that there is a very Eurocentric perspective that, especially within healthcare and development, that we have the right to go into communities as outsiders and to start asking very difficult questions to people about their health, personal questions, but also to have them under the spotlight in terms of practices. And when you think, actually, what would the equivalent of that be in the UK, to go to what I'd call perhaps a rural community, conservative in terms of their values and practices, and, you know, far away from large metropolitan areas. And I can think of a number of places that I'm familiar with in the UK that would be equivalents, not quite as extreme, maybe as Assam. And to have outsiders, maybe from India or the global south, go to that community and start asking about urinary tract infections, it would go down extremely badly. And so there is always this privilege that actually we can go to these communities and start really prying, questioning around very sensitive topics. So our approach really from the start was, how do we manage the relationships and how do we actually build our connections? We have been very, very lucky that our partners in Assam, we have Silchar Medical School, but also Assam University. And in this picture on the left-hand side, there's the researcher Delina Evans, who was from University of the Arts. There was Nimi, who was from IIT Delhi, and Deep Jyoti, who was from Assam University. And the two young women sitting with their backs, they are, again, researchers from Assam, so Deary and Kriti. So we had a team, but in terms of local team members, that was absolutely critical to the work. But the first step was to build a relationship with the communities. And in this photograph, you can see there's a woman with a sort of purple lilac sari in the background, and she's an ASHA, an accredited social health activist, and they've become absolutely central to this work. So when we think of the field work, so Delina and I would often have read material from many related disciplines, and we were also keen to look at actually where our knowledge was coming from. And I've drawn a lot from, I have one foot very much in anthropology, and medical anthropology is an area of interest in terms of how we understand health. What is my notion of health compared to somebody else? How we look at also other structures that can determine health. We ended up having to rely on a lot of digital ethnographic work, and I will explain that as well. Community knowledge was going to be key to this, and we really wanted this to feed into the diagnostics. And again, the team makeup was that in terms of even gender, it is a predominantly male team. That has changed over time, but we have a lot of microbiologists, chemists, diagnostic developers in the team, and also at the time an economist. They had very fixed ideas about what a solution would be. We also had to take a systemic approach, and we wanted, Delina and I feel very that social justice is a key part in the way that we work, and of course, there's service design within this. And was very much how, we were moving in and around these knowledge points throughout the work. And in summary, our first point was to understand place and community knowledge. We did actually want to get this cultural aspect of disease, medicines, and the biosocial. And the biosocial really relates to how people live in an environment, how this actually also impacts on them in terms of on a molecular level. We had to use digital methods, particularly when COVID came around. And also, we were always asking ourselves about where service design methods and tools should come into this dialogue between these different actors. We wanted to look at also not just about putting in a diagnostic as a test. We wanted to look at, even if there wasn't a system in place, or if there were very weak systems in place, how would this diagnostic impact on that? And we really wanted to amplify the community knowledge. So when we were thinking about also the objective design as social material things, it's really played two roles within this work. So dialogical and deliberative tools. And this really has helped us mediate conversations over some very difficult topics around health. It's been very explorative and also translational. And we don't see this as something that is fixed. It's been very dynamic. At the same time, we've looked at how design is informing the actual artifacts, the interventions. And this is how these artifacts are responding to the problem and to the context, and also really the idea of prototyping in many different ways quite early on in the research, in order to, again, to really develop the ideas, but to consolidate, again, our knowledge in different parts of the design artifact. And I'll be explaining in more detail how this has emerged. So in terms of the methodology, we really take that we have, of course, started with our design ethnography. This was very, very broad in the first instance. And the idea was, as I've mentioned before, building relationships. We did this through just having focus groups in the community. We would go in, we had tea, and we would have snacks with them. And then from that, we started to map and visualize and create personas. However, those design outputs were not for the community. They were for the team who were based at Assam University, at Silchar Medical School, in IIT Delhi, and also within our partners in the UK. From the way that we interacted with the community in Assam, we really wanted to leave it quite open. We did take in some visualization tools, and I will explain those again in subsequent slides. But for us, in a way, the service design tools were much more about disseminating knowledge across the different disciplines, which were very scientific, very unfamiliar with this way of working. And there was also quite a lot of learning from all our different perspectives on really learning to trust different types of fieldwork practices. And when I talk about, again, this these different ontological perspectives, the way that we were working came under quite a lot of scrutiny in the first 6 months of the project. There was actually quite a lot of pushback. There were questions about sample sizes, about rigor. How do you know you've only spoken to X number of people? We need sample sizes of 600, 800. And so there was these constant meetings where we were presenting back our fieldwork observations with quite a lot of interrogation. And this came from our Indian partners in Delhi, but also across the UK, because, again, our partners within India, but actually also in the UK, had come from very scientific training. Co-design, though, was very much used within the community. And this we saw from sharing the knowledge to actually co-creating knowledge. And this became actually, I would say, a really pleasurable experience because of the relationships that we'd built with the Ashers and then their role with the community. And actually, they have been really key in conceptualizing the service system. And the reason why it's been probably successful is because we've had this very intense relationship about actually how they deal with the community, how the people share and have trust in them, and actually then how our diagnostic test will respond to that. And this has been a very also interactive and ongoing iterative process with lots of different paper prototypes throughout the research. So these are just, again, I don't think I need to read this, but why co-design has become so critical to this space with AMR. And AMR, again, is very unfamiliar with co-design. So it is about this, dealing with the complex social political environments and educational technological issues. And actually, we know from our own experience in this area, no one person has knowledge and skills. But the real challenge, though, is understanding, of course, I've already mentioned the different disciplines, but also how we come to understand the communities that we're working with and how they come to understand us as well. And really with these interactions, what we really want to do is empower people to participate and also to give them some agency over their life and ideally environment. And I won't repeat this, but the central core for our works has been about building trust and getting these key insights from the community. And so when I think of design within and across teams and with communities, we've had co-design within the team. So that was with Delina, me, and with our partners in the UK, but also across teams within the aquaculture and dairy setting, and also within teams in terms of I'm in the human setting team, and I have team members in Assam and also in IIT Delhi. But then also, most importantly, is actually the design with the communities. And actually also that's taken very different forms depending on whether we've been talking to individuals, ASHES, the accredited social health activists, the primary healthcare centres, district health commissioners. And although we're only beginning now to have conversations at state level through our partners, but again, when we're using our design tools, they're very reflective of who these different actors actually are. And when we're talking about bridging cultural divides, we're not just talking about these different notions of Western medicine in relation to local ideas of medicine and healthcare. We're talking also about these very big ontological divides between the sciences and service design and social design. And one of the things we have always been trying to converge is, again, how we take the messiness from the field work and we actually have this seriously considered within the development of the diagnostic. And we had to challenge, as I said, many assumptions that were almost givens at the start of this work about what a diagnostic is. And I'll be coming on to that in a later part of the talk. So I just want to show that this was some early co-design sessions where we weren't really, these tools that we produced were from focus discussions and they were around natural remedies. And these were with the ASHA supervisors and with the ASHES. And at the same time, this photograph is with us in the Silchar Medical School demonstrating, and this is quite later on, some of the performance attributes of our test compared to the gold standard. And when we think again of these divides, one of the, again, the challenges at the start of the project is what do we think of when we think about diagnostics? So we are all familiar now because of COVID about point of care, which has become very sort of ubiquitous compared to maybe a few years ago. But we've always had in the West, you know, for a number of years, home pregnancy testing. You have very simple blood glucose monitoring testing. And then also when you think of diagnostics, there's a more sophisticated PCR type testing, which occurs in labs. But we're still thinking within, again, very sort of Western concepts of healthcare, lots of packaging, still also quite complex in terms of the steps that need to be taken, and also the considerations over the clean environment, access to water, not in the case of COVID, but also often about disposability. So these in their own way as diagnostics are, again, even when they're simple or appear simple, are highly technical, complex technologies and systems of delivery. So when we're thinking of actually bridging this gap between the diagnostic divide and knowledge, we also have this idea about Western medicine, about performance, trust, evidence-based. It's part of, as I've mentioned, these very closed systems. When we look at local contexts, we're very much faced with unreliable infrastructure, fragmented processes, a lot of knowledge and myths too. So again, these were these different perspectives weren't really considered at the start of the project. The Western medicine really was privileged over the local context as offering a solution. And in fact, the more we did our field work, and again, we were engaging not just with individuals, but also gathering very strong visual evidence about what village life was appeared, how the primary healthcare centres functioned, the stresses and strains on them. We were discovering that there was quite a lot of dissonance between these two different viewpoints. I should also add in this research that at the same time we were having microbiological samples taken, urine samples taken by Silchar Medical School via the primary healthcare centre. And there were some anomalies there that were coming through, which firstly was a very, very, very low level of samples coming from the primary healthcare centre, but the literature had said that there was a problem with UTI. At the same time, at Silchar Medical School, there was a large body of evidence that showed that people were coming in with extreme UTI and already established and developing kidney damage. So again, well, in the first 6 months, really nothing was fitting together as a picture. And also from observations done at the primary healthcare centres in the urban, in the peri-urban and in the rural context, there were about 2 UTI patients coming through a day. So this idea that the diagnostics was going to be situated in the primary healthcare centre became an irrelevance in a way. We were saying there is no point in having it in the primary healthcare centre. And I'll give more detail on that. So we, from a sort of service design research, we were trying to think, well, how do we start merging this notion of the Western medicine, primary healthcare centres, and the reality of the local context? And this was really an unknown for us. And again, when we were doing the field work, just to give you an idea, this is just as an observation as you come into a village, and this is quite a developed house. This would have extended family members of grandparents, children, and in the backyard you'll have water, and the villages are tucked into these very beautiful tropical woodlands. They're often far from roads. They're also far from any towns. And just to give again a snapshot, where we looked at where water is gathered, again, this relationship that humans have in terms of the animals, that they're in close proximity, that the water is not just used for drinking and washing clothes, but it's also shared with the livestock. How pond water, and at the back of the houses, they have these ponds which have been built, and how this is used again within the home. And then we also visited the primary healthcare centre. So when we're talking about having diagnostic equipment in a lab, this is what a lab looks like in a rural primary healthcare centre. There is often lack of running water. There can be regular breakdowns of electricity, so reliant on car batteries as to provide very, very rudimentary supplies of electricity. And actually, the infrastructure is very depleted. And then also looking at the primary healthcare centre in terms of, you know, what do these physical environments look like, and how are they maintained in terms of hygiene. And this was, and also you can just see on the wall here, that is actually a list of medicines that's available within the PHC, but just actually what are these physical environments like when we're looking at what diagnostic should be, which tends, as I said, to be privileged from a very Western perspective. But one thing that, again, we did come across, which was within the larger primary healthcare centre in this peri-urban environment, there was this herb garden, and there was when we visited, there was a lot of talk about how these natural herbs really play a large part in the health of the community. And this again came through our focus groups discussions with the ASHES. So going back to the design ethnography and those early meetings we had, we really saw the ASHES from our early focus groups as the key gatekeepers to the community. They are very, very trusted community members within the villages. They are the first point of call for a whole range of issues. It's not just health, it's often around testing. They recommend people and identify them for HIV testing, for malaria. They also do deal with issues around domestic violence, but maternal health. And they are a really impressive group of women. And so actually within our first visits, they were very keen to be involved in the project. And from, again, when you originally planned for these encounters, you put in very modest numbers, but in fact, we were delighted that when we went to the primary healthcare centres, we had, well, 57 ASHES turned up, and they were very enthusiastic after we explained the project and how we felt the project should evolve. They were keen to participate. And I have to say again, it's really credit to our Assamese researchers, who you can see here, Deep Jyoti, Deary and Kriti, who are at the table here, because they were really the conduit for us to become sort of trusted visitors to these villages and the community centres. So one of the things we did early on, and this was quite groundbreaking, is that we had the field work from the microbiological side, that actually nobody was going to the UTI, to the PHC with UTI symptoms. And in quite a few early focus groups, there was this talk of urinary tract infections, and there was a sort of response of, this, no, not really, what is this? And actually we went away and we visualized the symptoms of UTI, and we went back to the community. And this actually is the English version, of course, but we have this in the local language, which is Bengali. And actually, when we showed these cards, the whole conversation and the energy changed. And in fact, UTI is not known as UTI, it's known as Tatrangi, which is a local word that describes these very, very unpleasant symptoms. And what we also identified is that the local community are using a large range of home remedies, not in a particularly systematic way, but there is knowledge in the community about how you manage the symptoms, how you actually treat them as well. So this visualization, even though it's very simple, really opened up discussions, not just with the ASHES, but with the community members around articulating what this condition was. What also emerged is that the women felt that their health was very, very much ignored. They had long journey times to the primary healthcare centres, that actually they could often be day labourers. So the idea of giving up half a day, queuing at the PHC was considered far too long, up to 4 hours. So Often they would go to the local pharmacist where they would buy unregulated over-the-counter antibiotics. The other problem was going to the primary healthcare centre. The doctors are male. They didn't feel they had the vocabulary or the means in which they can describe where the pains were. There was a lot of stigma and they felt very ashamed about describing the symptoms of UTI, particularly to male doctors. So this is why when we had another set of data being collected at the primary healthcare centre, there were no UTI patients coming through. However, when the condition was getting very severe, they were going to the tertiary hospital for very serious UTI infections, and that's where the kidney damage was emerging. So there are these different streams of data where we were again trying to understand where the gaps were and within the journey. And then we come back to this Western idea of actually if you're developing a diagnostic or a test, you need a target product profile. And this was a real challenge because all the field work, as I've mentioned before, was very, very messy. And then we were being asked by our team members at IIT Delhi, but also within Edinburgh and Bradford and Southampton, we need target product profiles. We can't proceed without these. And they were saying, you need to tell us. And we were having these quite intense conversations about how this should, how we should, deliver these TPPs. How do you interpret them? And so what Delina and I decided to do was turn this into a co-design session. Again, this was very unfamiliar to our team, so there was resistance with this. And this is where we started to actually develop what we'd say more familiar design, service design tools around personas, because actually what emerged really from the fieldwork side is that there was a real resistance to adopt or really appreciate how depleted the infrastructures were, how people were making decisions around their own health, how they understood themselves was a huge gap in itself. And then, so how do we get from that messiness into very specific performance requirements? So we produced a lot of tools, and this is one for our TPP workshop, which was actually held in Edinburgh. So again, because of the way that the research was funded, there was opportunity to bring our Indian team members over to Edinburgh, where they could also visit the labs. And we created this very extensive TTP workshop which ran for 4.5 days. Each setting had a day, and we had experts too from different areas on AMR to come in and try and disentangle the messiness of the field work and to translate it into performance specifications. And this is some of the material that we produced. So Delina and I looked at the field work, and we actually speculated on what a diagnostic would be. So we had intended use statements. This is a second one. So understanding hygiene and well-being, how can we build on the values of ASHES in raising awareness around UTI in the context of well-being and hygienic practices? So this wasn't about AMR, it wasn't about taking antibiotics, it was about trying to rethink what a diagnostic test would be, not as something that's placed in the primary healthcare centre, but would actually help the ASHES in their very challenging endeavour about conveying health information around hygiene, around the importance of staying hydrated. So within these intended use statements, we also had target use setting scenarios where we took, again, fieldwork data, and actually we described what a day would be like for a particular person. And again, we gave this material on the tables, and the teams were made up of 4 to 6 participants to really challenge the thinking for these diagnostic, technical and scientific experts. And this is some examples. So for each of these tools that we created, we had one large sheet, And here we have the understanding hygiene and well-being intended use statement. We have the scenario setting in which this would take place. We also had some consideration sheets. So these consideration sheets were really presenting the challenges. What happens if you don't have any electricity? What happens if the water system is turned off? What happens if there are no containers which are sterile? And all of these were again taken from the observations. We provided lots of visual information, and where we really wanted to challenge the team members, so this is co-design within the team, is breaking down their assumptions about what a diagnostic was going to be. And actually this became very revelatory, because by the end of the day on the human setting, there had been a really big shift in thinking about diagnostics, even maybe not thinking about it as diagnostic, thinking about it as a test. And what would a community test look like? What would a community test look like, which wasn't actually, which could be so simple that would require literally just a paper strip. And we were using, again, the team actually got quite into making taking strips of paper and playing around with it. And you can see at the bottom of this, there's a little paper roll, and there was references to pH papers used in the labs. And they created service scenarios, and you can't actually see it, but at the top of this sheet, when we asked them to think about their diagnostic, and they had to reconfigure the storyboard that they'd created with the test, we asked them to think about what would the value be that would be co-created through this test for, again, different community members. So this, although was quite a challenge, what was really, again, very rewarding at the end of it, because I think this was about 10 months on into the project, we were working still within our own disciplinary boundaries, that the Assam team said to us that until this moment, they really hadn't quite grasped what we were trying to do. But actually from this workshop, everything opened up for them, and they completely understood the way that we'd worked in terms of using this as almost a process. It was a conduit in taking this very complex situation and translating it then into something that actually had to deliver on a performance specification that would be highly responsive to the context. And then I'm just going to give some background now about the service development, and this will give more detail about the prototype and in fact what we have actually created in terms of this mini service system. So this is my colleague Till, and he's from Edinburgh University, but this is our field work when we had gone back, and we went back with some very, very simple service scenarios based on our discussions with the ASHES, but also which reflected the thinking from the target product profile workshop. And this was a first introduction into how we can start really conceptualizing this as a service and as a test. And so actually, again, the ASHES at this point, it was very much using these tools as points of reflection around what was emerging. And they gave very good feedback and input about issues around use, on how community members currently understood themselves. And at this point too, we couldn't leave visual material behind for ethical reasons, but actually we provided notebooks and they were sketching down our visual cards for the symptoms of UTI. And this, again, has become part of the service doser kit. So just to give you, this is jumping really to how we, this is after many iterations, an overview of just what the service would look like in its simplest form of a story. So the idea is that we have a natural remedy card that comes in the kit. And on the natural remedy card, again, this is taken from the local knowledge of the women and the ASHES who we've been engaging with. We have a recording recording strip down the side for the test. We have a little pack of 4 very simple paper tests. And in the little brochure fold out, we have information around prevention, so personal hygiene, staying hydrated, not buying over-the-counter medicines. And so that's all within this very simple little card paper pack. So if we take this, we look at the next image, we have the community member. She feels unwell. Oh, I should also add, in the community pack, we have a visual card of the symptoms of UTI. So again, this has become part of the kit. The community member feels unwell. She can look at the visuals. She has the symptoms of UTI. The ASHA comes along and provides the doser kit. Within it, the community member points to the symptoms she has. The ASHA explains that she will need to take a test for 4 days. And every day, the member needs to take this test first thing in the morning. The test takes less than 5 minutes. And the community member records down the test result, but also they're encouraged to take natural remedies. And this can be lemon water, tucumen seeds, basil leaves and water. And to record the natural remedies, they record the 4 days of testing, and the ASHA comes back in 4 days, looks at the remedy card, looks at the testing results from the paper strip. If it's all clear, the ASHA again just reinforces the message around personal hygiene, especially in the hot seasons, staying hydrated, and also if the community member though is unwell, what they recommend, they are fast-tracked to the PHC. They go with the recording card and the natural remedies. They go with the visualization card that they've identified, again, the symptoms that they're suffering with. They see the doctor there, and because they'll be fast-tracked, they won't need to wait for 4 hours. But the idea is the doctor there will do further tests, and they will be given the appropriate prescription for antibiotics to deal with the UTI. And ideally, the community member feels better. So we visualize this journey. Again, this is after many, many iterations. And what we came to call this is, again, through our discussions, is amabuchi. And this is a local word, is to know. And one of the key things with this is that we want the community members who currently have no understanding around this, of what UTI is, how it can be prevented, and actually also how to and the importance of going to the PHC. We saw this as to know. And it sort of also makes reference to Foucault's technologies of the self, and this idea that ultimately we are all trying, even in the most simple way, whether it's through a diary and keeping a note of how much we eat, or whether it's your menstrual cycle with apps, actually to know yourself in terms of your health and well-being is really a very, it's a critical point, especially for women. And so amabuchi means to know, and this is a local word, and this is what we've actually now called our test. So we got to this point where we had the service scenario as a concept worked out, and the ASHAs had really had lots of conversations with us over this. And then COVID arrived and we were really stuck because, of course, we couldn't travel. So because we built a remarkable relationship with the ASHAs, one of the things we decided that was there an opportunity for the ASHAs to continue the field work. And again, we had conversations with our researchers in Assam who consulted with the ASHAs, who were really delighted with the idea that they could become active members of the research team. And in fact, we, as part of this process, we bought 18 Indian smartphones for them. We briefed them. We created a whole protocol around the research, around ethics, around consent. And the idea was that when they were going out to meet community members, and community members spoke about symptoms, they would then produce some of our prototypes, so the visualization recording card, the natural remedies, and actually they would use these to mediate the conversations and gather feedback. And then we had on our WhatsApp, we set up two primary healthcare centre groups where the ASHEs were coming from on the WhatsApp. We paired one supervisor with an ASHE, so we had these all coded on the WhatsApp group. And the ASHEs, from the conversations, we created visual data recording sheets, would write down the conversations they had about UTI, around the symptoms, the remedies, and also gather some information on the prototypes. And then these would appear on the WhatsApp group. We uploaded these into Padlet. They were all in Bengali, they were translated, and then we did the data analysis on an in vivo. And as a process of digital ethnographic work, it worked beautifully. So we have 9 supervisors, 9 ASHEs, and they encountered over 90 community members with this. This is the test kit. So in the test kit, you have your 5 strips, and you what it will tell you when you use them is that you either have a positive UTI test, you don't have a UTI test, but you have a bacterial infection, or actually you don't have, you're all clear. And if you still have symptoms, it will be recommended that you go to the PHC. This is just some of the examples from the digital ethnographic work that came through, that we sent through into the WhatsApp groups, and then these were sent to the Padlet. More examples again of the visual material we provided and how the responses were collected. This was fed back to the ASHEs and also district health commissioners, again, as part of the conversation. In terms of the development of the actual test, what we're having here is also demonstrating some early iterations of how the test, just how it would perform in front of the ASHEs and again, lab members and doctors at the primary healthcare centre. And then actually the most important thing, again, you can have the service, but we needed a data management system, and this is totally analog. And what we've created here is a very simple way that you can actually monitor all the data that is collected, collected through the ASHEs, how this is recorded in a book, which actually corresponds to 50 doser kits. This is part of a bigger batch numbers that are kept at the primary healthcare centre. And this is a very simple prototype of the data visualization that will be carried out for the ASHEs in terms of their encounter with the community member, what's recorded. Then also, if their test is positive, they take the top paper out. This is taken to the PHC with the symptoms, the visualization card. Again, it mediates conversations which had been difficult between the doctor. And this is a data flow storyboard that we've shared with the district health commissioners, with the ASHEs. And one of the things we have built into this, that there is no way that the test can just be disposed of. Everyone has a batch number, and with the ASHEs, they have recommended that the payment would be incremental in terms of every touch point, so that the data flow then also becomes very tightly monitored, because the payment will be following the data flow and recording that is taking place across the system. And I probably should have left more time for this, but this was again very much co-designed with the ASHEs and the district health commissioners. We also got feedback from the district health commissioners that they'd like the test as it's developed to go to health and sanitation days and to be introduced to school children, especially young teenagers. In terms of strengthening the AMR management system, without the test, what we find is that the women go to the local pharmacist, they buy over-the-counter antibiotics. We can see that they also do use natural medicines, and they also will go to the tertiary hospital. When we introduced our test with the ASHEs, the community member is having the conversation with the ASHE, who is trusted They're given information about natural remedies, prevention, hand washing, staying hydrated. They're also given information about not buying the problems of buying over-the-counter antibiotics. We also then, if they are positive, hopefully they're cleared through the test, that and the knowledge is reinforced with the community members around prevention. If they do have to go to the PHC, they have further testing for the appropriate prescription for the antibiotic to treat the bacterial infection, and also identify whether there's any resistance within that infection as well. So again, the antibiotic would be much more specific in treating the UTI. And then we did also get money from the Global Impact Accelerator to look at what implementation and manufacturing would look like. And I wasn't really going to give much detail, but that was just, again, we did this as a co-design online with our team members in Assam, but with, again, health officials to look at, again, obstacles and opportunities for this around implementation. So what we really, in a very broad way, have been trying to do is build systems of knowledge around personal hygiene, about the correct pathway, prevention, in a way systemizing some of the knowledge around natural remedies, because this is absolutely critical to the community in terms of how they manage their health. And then also giving people the opportunity to know themselves in terms of what these pain, symptoms, blood in the urine, burning, micturition actually means for them. And we have had a remarkable response from the community members in terms of even providing the visualization card of the symptoms. Quotes back from our fieldwork where members of the public said that it had lifted depression and anxiety because for the first time they knew that this wasn't a serious condition like cancer, that it could be managed and it could be treated. So design's contribution was very much about building the relationships and trust. It was also about adopting a systemic approach and to really make the interconnectedness between the diagnostic inventions, knowledge already in the community, and also to, again, create a pathway to correct treatment for a UTI. This was really taking an approach that operated at different levels. Design really played a role in terms of shifting the team's thinking from working very much in siloed ways with microbiologists, diagnostic people working in their own particular silo, and then this sharing of knowledge and taking the messiness of what we've seen and really trying to deliver something that was situated and reflective of the context. And we've had to challenge this role, this assumption on the role of diagnostics, especially from a Western perspective, and of course amplify the local knowledge on natural remedies.